back with Dr. Gary Small, UCLA professor, world-renowned expert on the subject of the mind and the brain. As we were preparing for the interview, Doctor, one of the producers was talking to you about the topic of short-term memory. A very bright and youthful woman in her early 40s and was talking about bemoaning short-term memory.
I think I remember that conversation.
Tell us, I also have had some questions, like all of us, about short-term memory, and so we wonder, is this something significant or not? And of course, you can't make a diagnosis without knowing a great deal more. But talk to us about the person watching this who is 40 and wondering, my goodness gracious, I can't remember Aunt Mary's name, or short-term memory concern, a question. Talk about that for a moment, if you would be kind enough.
So we're all concerned about memory. I mean, if you think about it, memory defines who we are. If you don't have memory, you have no past, you can't plan the future, and you really can't enjoy the present. So the idea of losing our memory abilities is frightening. It really is a question of losing our humanity. Now, this becomes a big concern as people get older because they see a lot of their friends developing serious memory problems. But it turns out that memory complaints affect everybody at all ages. We recently did a large study with the Gallup organization where they call people up, thousands of them every day, and we surveyed over 20,000 people, and we found that people even in their 20s are having memory complaints. Certainly as you get older, it's more frequent, and by age 45, it's significant. You can measure memory performance in an average 45-year-old that's worse than what you'd see in an average 25-year-old. So I've come to see that this is a normal part of aging, and what we've developed as a result of our research and in our programs for the public are ways to help people compensate for those kinds of memory issues. And also to understand what's going on, because sometimes there can be some medical problems, there can be some conditions that can be treated. I remember the first time I saw a patient who was thought to have Alzheimer's disease. This is back when I was in training. He was taking 10 milligrams of Valium a day. I stopped his Valium and I cured his Alzheimer's disease.
But if you're standing in a Starbucks alongside somebody who's healthy and 40 years old and says, my goodness gracious, I can't remember if I took a vitamin an hour after I took it, and they then say to you, they find out who you are, and they say to you, well, what do I do about that, doctor? How do you respond? Is there a kind of simplistic way of thinking about that, or does that require a deeper and more intense diagnosis?
Well, certainly if it's a big problem, it requires more assessment. But if it's just somebody complaining about forgetting they took their vitamin, the most logical reason is that they just weren't paying attention. You know, most people are multitasking. It's becoming a bigger and bigger problem with all our devices and smartphones. We're just not focusing attention. If to remember things, you got to get that stuff into your head. It's really two components to memory: encoding and retrieval. So you've got to focus your attention, get that stuff into your brain, and then be able to pull it out when you want it.
And you have touched upon a subject of extraordinary interest to me, almost obsession, and that is, of course, technology and its interlink with making us any number of things. But smartphones make us, in some ways, we've talked about this privately, how smartphones are making us both simultaneously smarter and dumber at the very same time. Can you talk about that? Because I'm more interested in ways that it's making us dumber. It sure does seem to me that it is making us more than socially inept. It is certainly doing that in many ways to a lot of young people, or even more than young people, but is it making us just plain dumber?
It's having a lot of effects that would be more in the dumb direction than the smart direction.
It certainly seems to me that way, Doctor.
Well, you know, I think I'm kind of in the middle of that argument because I can see ways it can really be very helpful because you know, our brains are kind of economical. So if we know we can use a device to solve a problem or to gain information, we don't bother memorizing it. I mean, people come to my office and they'll say, "Doctor, you know, what's going on? I can't remember phone numbers anymore." I say, well, you know, don't worry about that because you can keep your phone numbers in your smartphone and just remember how to look it up. I mean, that's important. So we're becoming retrievers of information and maybe not memorizers as much as we used to. You know, where it's making us dumber is in all the distractions. And here's the problem. You know, our brains are kind of wired to like new information. That's why there's lots of TV producers and writers and novelists because we all want the new stuff. We don't want the reruns. And as a result of that, these devices kind of drive us to constantly seek out new stuff. So, you know, it reminds me of when I got an upgrade on my cell phone a few years ago. My wife said to me, well, you know, Gary, find out where that restaurant is that we're going to tonight. I said, oh, sure, I'll look it up on my phone. And she came back 20 minutes later and she said, well, where's the restaurant? I said, what restaurant? But hey, here's a really cool site I just found. And so we get kind of...
There's a kitten video on YouTube that you might like.
So we get kind of caught up in that and we're not paying attention. It kind of leads to, it worsens attention deficit symptoms. I mean, people will spend hours and hours on their computers with their devices and they kind of experience a brain fog, they get exhausted and they can't...
A data smog of some type.
It's too much, it's information overload. And so we don't know how to manage it well. We don't know how to take breaks, sit back, and of course...
and disconnect.
Yeah, it's really important to do that.
So, because I feel so strongly about this, and because every time you agree with me, I think you're brilliant.
You're like the rest of us.
Is it fair to say that as a great brain, mind expert, you feel strongly that it is important for the human being to disconnect? Is that a fair statement?
It's a fair statement, and in the books that we've written on it, we definitely tell people, take time offline, and even set your device for the alarm to go off, because now is the time to meditate or do some Tai Chi or take a walk or have a face-to-face conversation and put your device away.
And would it also be fair to say, because I agree with this and want to hear you as the great expert say it, that there is a profound curse to distraction? Is that a fair statement to say that the human mind can be, if sufficiently distracted, cursed in its cognitive ability? Is that fair?
Yeah, I think what happens is that we train our brain to be distracted. We sort of develop a way of thinking that mimics our behavior online. And we develop this, what I call staccato quality of thinking. I used to play piano when I was a kid. So we jump from idea to idea just as we jump from website to website. The average view of a URL is a second or give or take a half a second. And so we're kind of doing that, and we're not sitting back. We're not delving into problems in depth. And there's been arguments that we're becoming less creative.
So brilliance then, wisdom or brilliance, is then born of consideration or contemplation. And the opposite of contemplation or consideration is distraction.
Yes, it's distracting, and there have been some studies showing that isolation in some ways does correlate to agree with creativity. The other side of it is that whatever we do with our devices only accelerates or puts into high gear everything that is human. So why are we doing this? In part, not just because our brains are attracted to novelty, but also we are social animals. We love connecting. You know, we're Facebooking and we're texting and doing all these things because we want to know what our friends are thinking about everything from moment to moment.
But you certainly would note that the increase in technology has brought forward a radical increase in avoidant personality disorder, and that 30 years ago, so if someone calls me on the telephone, I answer, and today people have permission to hide behind their devices. So avoidant personality disorder is rampantly increased, and that also correlates.
You know, I don't know that I'd agree that it's a disorder or that that's increasing because we just don't know. But we do know that people who are socially...
We don't know, doctor, that a smartphone gives in a human being a greater ability to hide from the world than a person that didn't have a smartphone 30 years ago? We don't know.
Well, we know that.
I think we do.
Whether it's a disorder or not, that's what I'm
no, but
arguing
we do know. I'm asking you to take logical jump. We do know that there is a malady, a psychological malady called avoidant personality disorder, and we also know that disorder is in the increased
if somebody has an avoidant personality, the devices are great. They can avoid social interaction. If you talk to somebody face to face, it's anxiety provoking. You've got to think of what to say the next moment. If they're getting uncomfortable, you've got to think of how to respond. If you're just using email and texting, you can measure your response and you can avoid those anxieties.